Hey guys, it's Tealus here. Welcome to the beautiful nighttime sky of Dalaran. I am up way high in the tower at the Hall of the Guardian, which is the class order hall for mages in World of Warcraft Legion. And I would like to look into part 2 of our 2 video series looking at Arcane Mage, the arcane specialization for mages in World of Warcraft Legion. Now we've already gone through the artifact weapon, as you can see on my back there. And we have also gone through the changed, removed, and new abilities coming to Arcane Mages in Legion. In this video, I would like to go into the PvE and PvP talents, so let's go ahead and take a look at them. Now, I will say, if I go a little bit slow on this, I apologize. A lot of the talents are return with the same name, but they've almost all changed in some way. Very rarely are you going to hear me say that, some talent is going to be the same as it used to be. In many cases, that's not going to be the case. There are a few talents on here that are still the same. Many of them have changed. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and start with the top. First, we have Presence of Mind. The first to change. It used to be that Presence of Mind would give any ability with a certain amount of cast time to be instant. Now this is only your next 2 arcane blasts, so you are limited there by that. You have Words of Power, which is a passive, grants a 1% increased chance to trigger arcane missiles per 20% of your mana you have unspent. So while the mastery of an arcane mage has really shifted, and it's no longer about keeping your mana as high as possible, and instead it's more about timing when you use your evocation. I don't know how popular this will be, because this kind of shifts it back into the old way of doing mana, but it's a possibility for people to take. The last here is an Arcane Familiar, which basically gives Arcane Mages their own pet. You summon a familiar that attacks your enemies and increases your maximum mana by 10%. It lasts for 1 hour, so it's a very long cooldown. And I'll go ahead and pop it here. You can see it's very tiny. It's a little arcane orb. And if I begin attacking it, it should begin attacking along with me. And you'll see the other light that comes out of it kind of comes from my body. It's a little weird. Because it's, the little arcane familiar does not have a very large body. That may change in the future, but you can see the little arcane barrages coming from the familiar. So, I'm going to actually run away while we discuss these next one, because I have not quite figured out how to get my silly little familiar out of combat. I do not know if that's intended or that's a bug, but for right now, that is the case. So, in the next tier, we have Shimmer, which is excellent. It is basically an extra blink. So, Shimmer will replace Blink. It teleports you 20 yards forward unless something is in its way, and it's unaffected by the global cooldown and castable while casting. So that's the big deal. So Blink is normally something you just free yourself and get out of the way. 15 cooldown. This is something completely different. This allows you to escape. It gives you 2 charges, and it's allowed while casting, which is really cool. And it does work with Displacement, the new ability for Arcane Mages, as I just used there. And I still have my my charge here after I use that Displacement. So it still will reset the cooldown on Blink, just like it would, or in this case, it gives you your charge back. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can give a good example here of me being able to cast and then use this at the same time. So I'll use that and I move forward and I'm still able to cast, which is really cool. So this is going to be something that Arcane Mages may want to take, especially when they had that interactivity with the new Displacement spell. Your second option is Cauterize, which has been changed a little bit. Its basics are still there. Fatal damage instead brings you to 35% of your health and burns you for 28% of your maximum mana, maximum health, for 6 seconds. However, this new effect is added, which is pretty awesome. While burning, movement slowing effects are suppressed, and your movement speed is increased by 150%. This cannot occur more than once every 2 minutes. That is still the same cooldown on it, but the movement speed and the movement suppression is there, which is really awesome. It's just a, it's a get out of jail free card there. So you're getting some really interesting options in this tier for survivability. The old tier, I don't think necessarily was the greatest. You had both Cauterize and Cold Snap, and then Greater Invisibility. Now you have Greater Invisibility baseline, and you have Shimmer to replace that, and it's also moved up a few tiers. Looking at that last ability, Cold Snap has changed completely. Before, Cold Snap used to immediately reset the cooldown on Ice Block and Frost Nova spells, and it would heal you. Now, Ice Block has 2 charges, and it will heal you for 3% of your maximum health every 1 second. So just so you get an idea of how big that is, Ice Block lasts for 10 seconds, so that's a 30% heal, and you have 2 charges of it, so you get 60% healing out of your Cold Snap, which is pretty cool. This is a passive, okay? This is not something that you have to activate. And it is a, since it's a passive, basically it's only affected by Ice Block's cooldown, which is a 5-minute cooldown, which is pretty hefty. So this may be something that players may want to take in terms of survivability. Now, the next tier. I'm sorry that we haven't seen anything in that 30 tier that is more PvE oriented. This tier is more PvE oriented. This tier will be, kind of remind you of the old 90 tier, because all 3 abilities are still the same. Mirror Image is still the same, 2-minute cooldown, 3 copies. Basically everything's still the same, is the same on it. Same thing with Incanter's Flow. It has essentially stayed the same. In my honest opinion, I have hated Incanter's Flow. I've always gone Mirror's Image because Rune of Power was always frustrating to manage, and I just didn't like the management of the spell. However, Rune of Power has changed. It is now on a 45-second cooldown, and it places a Rune of Power on the ground for 10 seconds, so that part is close to the same, but it's only for 10 seconds, so that's a big deal. Before, the rune used to last about 3 minutes. Now it's only 10 seconds, but it's going to increase your spell damage by 50% while you stand in it for 8 yards. So it is a 10-second huge buff to your damage, as opposed to it being this kind of central, it being this central rune that you have to stand on while you PvE to do your damage. Now, basically, what this does is, I believe this is still going to be a viable talent in PvE both ways. It's just you're no longer going to, it's actually going to have to be in part of the rotation, so you're going to have to actually pay attention to it more. And then it actually now has use for PvP, because before, Rune of Power was completely useless in PvP, because you're almost never stationary like that. And now you have the option to actually have some burst damage if the situation arises. Maybe you're protecting a flag node, or you are inside, maybe the flag room, and you are trying to actually kill the flag carrier or protect your own flag carrier. You're actually going to get some use out of it now, instead of basically being pigeonholed into Mirror Image, or for some really expert players into Incanter's Flow. That's no longer the case now for PvPers. In the 60 tier, we have Supernova. Supernova, for the most part, has stayed the same. However, you do not get 2 charges on it. And I believe Supernova before used to replace Frost Nova. That's no longer the case. So you now have Frost Nova. It's always there. And on top of that, you now get Supernova as well. I'm going to show you the spell visual on this, and you're going to think it's absolutely amazing. And I honestly feel that it's not going to stay, because it just looks way too cool, and it's way too gaudy. It's huge. I think they have a bug with the radius on it. But I'll go ahead and let you see it here, just so you can see beta shenanigans and how bad it can be at times. I'll go ahead and use it right here on this middle bulwark construct, and you can see it pretty much lights up the whole room. Oh, you can't even see it from that distance. I'll have to show it again after the cooldown comes out, but it's pretty large. It fills up the room pretty well. So let's go ahead and go into the next one while that cooldown goes back up. In the second slot here, we have Charged Up. This one's brand new. It immediately grants 4 Arcane charges. This is something I can definitely see PvEers taking. And even PvPers if they want that quick burst cooldown from range. Only a 30-second cooldown on this, so this is something to look for. I don't know how popular it will be. And then the third tier we have Resonance. Arcane Barrage deals 25% increased damage per target it hits. So if we're talking about AoE, an AoE setting, this is likely going to be a talent that you want. You're going to be able to swap talents in and out a lot if you need to, and basically you can be like, okay, we're entering into a more AoE heavy wing of a PvE raid. I can go ahead and take Resonance, whereas maybe you may take something else, maybe something like Charged Up if it's more single target. Let me see if I can go ahead and use this Supernova here. Maybe they did already nerf it. It's no longer as bad. Yeah, you can see it right there. It blows up the entire room. I do believe that's a bug right now, but it is still kind of fun to see Supernova literally be a Supernova. If they keep that in the game, it'll be kind of fun for Arcane Mages to loll around and throw that out. So, in the 75 tiers, you have Ice Flows. Makes your next mage spell with a cast time shorter than 10 seconds, castable while moving, unaffected by the global cooldown, and castable while casting, max 3 charges. This is the same as the old Ice Flows that used to be in the 15 tier and is now in the 75 tier. Ring of Frost has not changed at all. It is still the same. So, up until now, we've had about basically only 4 or 5 talents out of the, 12, 14 that we've gone through that are still the same. Many of them have just changed, their names have stayed the same, but they've changed. Some a little bit, some significantly. One that's significant here is Ice Ward. Ice Ward used to be completely different from what this shows here now, but now Ice Ward, basically, your Frost Nova has 2 charges. PvPers, I don't see Ring of Frost being more useful than Ice Ward. Having 2 charges on your Frost Nova, and then you also can choose Supernova as well as a PvPer. To me, it's a no-brainer. Like, I would take it. It gives you even more ability to escape, and then you have Shimmer and Displacement. Arcane Mages are going to be a real nuisance to deal with in Warlords, not in Warlords, in World of Warcraft Legion, and their talents are filling in the holes. You may have noticed in many of these talent videos, a lot of these talents, even though they're PvE talents, they're catering to PvP players, but they're still leaving enough PvE options that are really good for you to take. And if they don't give you enough PvE options, they're basically giving it to you in baseline abilities. So in this 90 tier, you will see 2 familiar abilities. Nether Tempest has technically remained unchanged. I believe it is now 70% increased damage per arcane charge as opposed to 50%. That is something in the abilities video that I discussed over and over again that basically has not changed. That is the baseline now. It is now 70%. Blizzard, that's a numbers change though. Blizzard could come in and change that all of a sudden, but for now it is a 70% increase per your arcane charges. Unstable Magic, Arcane Blast have a 15% chance to explode on impact, dealing 50% additional damage. That also has not changed at all. In the third tier here we have Erosion. Your attacks erode the target's resistances, increasing all damage the target takes from your spells by 1%, stacking up to 8 times. After 3 seconds of not taking damage from your spells, this effect decreases by 1% every 1 second. So if you're able to create consistent sustain on a target, this will be a valuable talent. This is really the interesting PvE tier, if you ask me. In my opinion, this is the interesting PvE tier. The other one would be the 45 tier. But the 45 tier you're kind of used to. Only one major change in that tier with Rune of Power. This one, once again, there's only one major change in Erosion, a brand new one. But at the same time, it really does kind of open up what it could be here in this tier. And so I leave it up to the PvE masterminds to know which one's going to be the best DPS increase. So in the last tier, we have Overpowered. Casting Arcane Missiles extends Arcane Power for 2 seconds. This has not changed. We have Arcane Orb. which essentially has not changed at all. The cooldown is still the same. It will pass through. It will grant one arcane charge when cast, and every time it deals damage. So it will still be, I'm going to go ahead and use it right here, and I'll just use it straight across these right here. As you can see, 4 arcane orbs straight off of going through it. And so basically Arcane Orb has not changed at all. And I really do, just pointing this out again, I really do in the top left hand corner love how your Arcane charges now appear in your actual UI as opposed to a silly debuff that was in the right hand before. The last ability we have here is called Quickening. Arcane Blast, Arcane Missiles, and Arcane Explosion also grant 2% haste for 6 seconds, stacking up to 100 times. This effect is cleared when you cast Arcane Barrage. I'm going to use this here just so you guys can see. I've tried several times to get this up as high as possible. You can't use Arcane Barrage at all, so you kind of have to be careful. I think the best way to do this may be through Arcane Explosion, because Arcane Explosion does not cost too much mana, but it does start costing a ton of mana once you get increased. As you can see, my mana pool is now depleting very rapidly, and I'm trying my best to build the stacks up. I think the highest I've gotten is maybe 16, 17 stacks, but it does stack all the way up to, you know, that 100 and so forth. And you have to be careful on when you kind of burn it. You have to be careful of when you use evocation, because if you use a full cooldown of evocation, you won't get the full haste off. So I was able to get up to, looks like 25, 20, 26, 27 stacks. 26 stacks before it went away. So it's kind of a replacement for the fact that Arcane Blast used to consecutively increase its speed the more arcane charges you had. It's going to be a very fun talent to play with. And in my opinion, this is a very expert talent for people to play with. So PvEers, depending on how the numbers work on this, this may be the go-to item for PvEers, just because I think it'll take a lot of expert, you know, kind of maneuvering to get it to happen. And you don't really have other ways of generating mana, so it's going to be pretty difficult to... I want to see the mages that are able to get it up to 100 stacks, because that would be crazy, having 200% haste. So definitely something that's fun to look at and to try and mess around with if you're an arcane mage. So with that, that is all of the PvE talents. Let's go ahead and look into the honor talents. Now in this first tier, honor talents basically are always the same in the first 2 tiers. Your first tier is going to be your PvP trinket tier, and your second tier is going to be your ranged DPS tier. Now, explaining the PvP talent system, basically you level from 1 through 50, and then when you hit level 50 you can prestige and start back at level 1. Well, why would I want to prestige and start back in level 1? Well, you have to earn these abilities starting with Gladiator's Medallion and going south down to Master of Escape, and then you start back up at Adaptation and go south to Rewind Time, and you do that again for the third tier. So by the time you reach level 49, 50, I'm not sure what it is, you'll finally have mass invisibility. So that is how you'll gain your abilities, you know, at level 1, 4, 7, as you level through the honor system. And then some people will get to 50 and they'll be like, I don't want to lose all my talents, or too many of my talents are in the right hand side, so I'm not going to prestige. The people who love all the left hand side talents, maybe they may never prestige. They may be like, they'll have no problem prestiging, because I mean it's like no big deal for them, because most of their talents will be up again pretty quickly. So with that, let's go ahead and go into the first tier. You get an honorable medallion the first time you go into a BG. That is a 3-minute cooldown. I believe that's somewhat close to what the heirloom type of a medallion is like. It's like a 3-minute cooldown, and then you can get the actual PvP trinket that reduces to 2. That's what the Gladiator Medallion does. It reduces it down to 2 minutes. You have Adaptation, which all loss of control effects with a duration of 5 seconds or more will activate your Honorable Medallion spell, but only causes it to incur a 60-second cooldown. I really like this on any type of DPS PvP. Because you have that 60-second cooldown on adaptation, with adaptation, so you have a 60-second cooldown on your Honorable Medallion. However, do take note that if you actually do manually activate your Honorable Medallion, it will incur a 3-minute cooldown, and adaptation will be down for 3 minutes. There is Relentless, which will actually replace your Honorable Medallion, and the duration of incoming crowd control effects reduced by 25%. I honestly only see this being taken by anything that can take a lot of damage, so mostly tanks. In the second tier, you have the ranged kind of talent tier. You have damage increased by 15%. Being attacked will cancel this effect for 8 seconds. You have Mind Quickness, increases haste by 6 seconds. And then you have Initiation, critical chance of your damaging abilities and attacks increased by 30% on targets at or above 80% health. I went through that pretty quickly. If you didn't hear the name of the first one, it is called Train of Thought. So, excuse me for not mentioning that right at the beginning. In the third tier, we're getting into the Mage-specific tier now. We have Netherwind Armor. It reduces the chance you will suffer a critical strike by 15%. There is Burning Determination. After being interrupted while casting a spell, you become immune to being interrupted while casting for 8 seconds. And then lastly, we have Prismatic Cloak. After you blink, spells have a 100% chance to miss you for 2.5 seconds. That's pretty cool, and that should work with Shimmer, and considering you have 2 charges of Shimmer, that's actually not a bad ability to have. I can already see the chaos that Shimmer and Displacement is going to have on melee. It's going to drive them nuts. You get a slow on you, and then they're just blinking all over the place, and it's going to drive people crazy. In the fourth tier, we have Temporal Shield. Envelops you in a temporal shield for 4 seconds. All damage taken while shielded will be instantly restored when the shield ends. This was an ability somewhere. I know this was an ability somewhere. I want to say Mists of Pandaria, and it's been brought back. But I do remember it. You take damage, and as long as you do not... and that damage will go back. It will kind of restore you back to your health after that damage has been taken. So just don't go into the fatal category in terms of damage you have taken, and Temporal Shield should be very good for you. 45-second cooldown. You have Dense Ice. Increases the amount your Ice Barrier absorbs by 60%, but your Ice Barrier can only absorb physical damage. Kind of a trade-off. I don't know... basically, if you're having a lot of trouble with melee, this may be something that Arcane Mages may want to take, considering that they're going to drive melee crazy with a Shimmer and the Shimmer and Displacement effect. It may be something they want to take. This is something I definitely can see Fire Mages taking. Frost should be able to keep a target off of them for a long period of time. But this is something I see Fire Mages taking, and it's something that I really think Arcane Mages will consider. Here we have Kleptomania. Spell Steal now has a 15-second cooldown, but steals all spells from the target. So, if you have a lot of buffs, you can just take them all from the target. Now, I will say, the problem with Spell Steal now is that the buffs that used to be present in the game have pretty much all been wiped out. Like, as I discussed in the first video, Arcane Brilliance has been removed from the game, so you're no longer going to have, those types of buffs on a target. Instead, you have to rely, on, kind of the short-term buffs. That being said, I can see how this can be very useful if a hunter or something just blows everything. Using Spell Steal on them will just devastate them. Especially if they do something like they have many aspects that they can add to themselves now that are huge defensive maneuvers. Just being able to have that in your inventory is pretty powerful. So it's really, in my opinion, kind of a tight race between these three in this tier. So in the fourth tier, we have Concentrated Power. Arcane Power lasts 5 fewer seconds, but the damage Oh my gosh. The damage bonus is increased by 10%. I was going to say damage boost. I guess that would have worked the same. So just straight passive damage buff there. More burst, less time. Torment the weak increases the damage by 15% on enemies afflicted by your slow spell or any movement slow effect. I believe this was also in the game at one point. I recognize the icon, I recognize the name, and I recognize the effect. So I'm not sure where and when it was in the game, but it is now back as a PvP talent. You have time anomaly. Every 5 seconds you have 5% random chance to gain 4 arcane charges and arcane power for 8 seconds regardless of its cooldown. This is so bizarre and so cool at the same time. I do know that PvPers and PvEers, but we're specifically in the PvP talent tree now, most of the best players like more control over their abilities, and so something random like this is not something that they necessarily like, especially in an arena setting when you kind of have to set up maybe where you're bursting or when you're target switching. I don't know how popular this will be, but at least for random battlegrounds, this is a lot of fun right here for this ability. And personally, this is one I would take as an arcane mage just because it's a lot of fun. We need more fun abilities in the game. So, let's take a look at the last tier, the supposed fun tier. Let's see how fun it is. Master of Escape reduces the cooldown of greater invisibility by 45 seconds. Greater invisibility was increased to a 2-minute cooldown in this expansion, but it was given baseline to you. So you now have a 1:15 cooldown on your greater invisibility, which could further cause more frustration, along with Shimmer, along with Displacement, double Frost Novas. I mean, Arcane Mages are getting a lot to deal with the fact that they do have to stand still and cast to really get off their damage. So that is an option. There is Rewind Time, increases the duration of displacement by 14 seconds. I'm not sure if I'm a huge fan of this, because displacement already has a 13-second use on this. It's not like it resets your health pool, and even if it did, that would be kind of like, it's like a noob talent to take, because like, it really is kind of like a noob talent to take, because it doesn't make sense for you to, just plop down a blink when you start battle, and then like, all of a sudden 25 seconds into the battle you're like, oh man, I've taken too much damage, and then I'll rewind time. I don't really like this because like, you can travel really far in 27 seconds. And I just don't see the point of that. I think 13 seconds is plenty to throw your target off guard, and I really just don't see this being taken. The last ability here is Mass Invisibility. You and your allies, and this feels like it was taken straight out of Guild Wars 2 from a Mesmer, but this was, you now have Mass Invisibility. You and your allies, 1-minute cooldown, within 40 yards, instantly become invisible for 5 seconds. Dealing damage will cancel the effect. So, this is going to be pretty cool if you ever get into a mass, maybe world PvP setting. Having arcane mages with mass invisibility is going to be so potent, because you're going to be able to come up on the enemy and they're not going to know what hit them, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I don't see this being used too much, maybe in something like a BG. Otherwise, this could be something useful. I just had an epiphany of how extremely potent rewind time can be. 27 seconds is a vast time for you to travel, and picking up the flag and using displacement puts you pretty much more than halfway across the map with displacement. So expect rewind time to be used significantly in that regard. I am sorry I did not even think of that, but that is a huge deal with rewind time. So in this last tier, there are 3 extremely fun options. There is Master of Escape, which is basically your basic PvP. I see this being kind of the most popular talent. You have Rewind Time, which has very high situational use, very effective situational use, dealing with flags. I hope Blizzard doesn't nerf that and say you can't do it with a flag, or you like drop the flag whenever you use displacement, because that would just be a bummer. And then mass invisibility, which has immense potential in terms of what you can do in a world PvP setting, setting all of your allies within 40 yards to be invisible. And if you were to able to chain that with maybe some other arcane mages, it's going to be devastating. You guys may have already seen what that massive invisibility can do inside Oshrin. There is that little scroll that can give you mass invisibility, and people just don't know where you're hitting from or where you're attacking from. Basically, arcane mages now have it on lockdown. They don't need no scrolls. They just have the ability. So that's really cool. These talents are going to be a lot of fun. Arcane Mage really, in PvE, in my opinion, as a person who wanted to PvE last expansion as a mage, I love these changes because I hated the mastery style from before, and now that mastery has changed. And then for PvP, almost everything that was really detrimental to an arcane mage, their problems with standing still, they have just thrown abilities at arcane mages, whether it be in the PvE talent tree, in the regular abilities, or in the PvP talent tree. They've just thrown abilities at you to confuse your opponents, keep them kind of on their toes and kind of guessing where you are, and give you some space to cast your spells, which is excellent to have in the game. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video on arcane mages. I think they're going to be a blast. Hopefully they do some crazy stuff like keeping that massive supernova visual right there, and you'll see, I mean, you're going to see that across the battlefield. But more than likely they're not going to keep that there. So that's everything with arcane mages. I apologize that this video took a little bit longer than I was expecting, but these talents and whatnot are a lot of fun to play with, and I can't wait to dive into a battleground and test them out some more. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm not sure what video will be next. I'm going to wait for the next patch to run through so I can kind of get an idea of which classes are more kind of set in stone, as opposed to the classes that are still kind of undergoing some major changes, specializations specifically speaking. And then once I figure that out, I will begin picking right back up where we left off here and go with some more specializations. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next. Tearless out.